Welcome to another episode of Software Explorations, Concepts and Overviews, hosted by yours truly, Tech Coach Ralph, where we are engineered to win. In last week's episode, we got started with APIs. We are going to be focusing on APIs and API testings. This week, we're going to be talking about how do we test APIs, one of the most crucial parts of software development and applications working are the APIs. So we must make sure that we have a good standard of quality, great test around these APIs so that we can protect our company as well as our customers and that they can have a successful use of our applications. So let's just jump right into testing APIs. We're going to figure out how to do it, the things that we need to consider, all of that good stuff. All right. All right. So, like I said, we are going to be talking about how to test APIs. That's going to be the main focus today. So, what is our agenda for today? So, we're going to have a recap of what we went through last week about our introduction to APIs. We are going to be focusing on the benefits of testing APIs, how we can prepare for testing APIs, some of the testing techniques we can employ when we're going through this API testing, and what tools can we use for testing APIs, and then we're going to wrap it up with our conclusion. So let's jump into it. Let's not waste any more time. So in last week's episode of Software Explorations, we went through what APIs are. So let's do a quick recap. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. APIs allow integration, efficiency, and innovation, amongst other things, but those are like the really core parts of what APIs allow us to do. APIs provide access to vast amounts of data from various sources, and you can connect them together. So types of APIs, there's RESTful APIs, probably the most popular one right now. There's SOAP APIs, and then there's GraphQL APIs. Then we discussed the different components of the APIs, and then we wrapped it up with some examples of APIs using Postman, how you can get some practical application, and some case studies of APIs. Now, let's jump into the benefits of API testing. So API testing ensures the functionality and reliability of your API. It helps detect bugs early in the development process. Super, super important, because if you don't know, the longer it takes to find a bug, the more expensive it becomes, the further along the bug gets. So if you prevent a bug from even getting started, there's almost no cost associated with it. If it gets developed, but you find the bug early in testing, then minor cost, but it's still resolved. But if the bug gets all the way to production where it actually affects a customer, that takes it's very expensive because it takes longer to fix it, and you don't know the damage that's been done. In the past, we've had to run scripts to fix errors that were caused by not detecting bugs early in the process. All right. So APIs also enhance the security of your application, and it improves the documentation and usability of your application. So all of those things, very, very beneficial. Like to API testing, it is an absolute must. So how do we prepare for testing APIs? We need to set up our testing environments. So that includes our tools, frameworks, things like that, software that we might need. Understanding the API documentation is crucial. Identifying endpoints and methods to interact with those endpoints, and then, of course, generating test data. We can't do anything without good test data. So let's talk about the API testing environments. So here are some questions that we should ask ourselves when relating to API testing environments. Where will this API be tested? And how are we going to have proper authentication and authorization? So that means, do we have do we test it on our local environment? Do we do a branch-based testing? Do we have a staging environment, a QA environment, and what is going to be the production environment? Are we going to be doing any testing on production? Because, we don't want to seed production with bad data. So those are the things that we have to consider. What tools will be used to test the API? And we'll get into the tools later on, but are we going to be using Postman? Are we going to be using Insomnia? Are we going to be using SOAP? What type of, based on what type of API is being developed, are we going to be writing automated tests for these APIs? Are there any additional dependencies that we need to set up? So if we're going to be doing automation, do we have the right tools to automate it? What libraries, what packages are we going to need? What language are we going to be doing it in? What kind of test data will be needed to test these APIs? Where we're going to get the test data. We'll be focusing a little bit more on test data later on, But that is going to be a very crucial aspect to setting up our environment, because the test data can also vary based on the environment that you're in. Another question, do we understand the API documentation? Because there can be documentation, but it's poorly written. We don't understand it, or it might be too complicated for us to understand. It could be missing things. So we have to go through the documentation, making sure that it's readable and it's understandable for us to be able to interact with that API. So also, in addition to those questions, like, can we successfully connect to the API? So after we have the information, after we have the documentation, can we connect to the API? Because if we can't connect, there's nothing you can do with it. Have we set up our environment variables? And what does that mean with environment variables? So in different environments, let's say from locally to our QA environment, our development environment, our production environment, there's going to be different endpoints. There's going to be different data that's being passed and able to be able to interact. Have we set that up in an easy and efficient way that we can easily switch back and forth between it? And we'll definitely cover that on a live stream when we get to this part. But it's very important that you have the right variables for the right environments. And then, basic, what is our API testing strategy? How are we going to approach testing this API? What type of tests that we're going to run? Things like that. And you also have to determine what environment are these tests going to be ran and at what times, so very important. And how are we going to execute our test cases? Are they going to be all manual? Are they going to be all automated? Or is going to be a mix? Like let's say in the production environment, are we going to be posting test data to production? Are we able to delete that data from the database? Or are we just going to be posting it in like up to a staging environment where we can have like data that's not exactly the case? Or, do we reset our data? So all these things that we have to consider. And then how can we successfully monitor and maintain our tests? Because if you don't have a good way to monitor the results and the tests that you're running, it's going to be very messy very quickly, and then it's become useless. And then we have to pretty much start all over, and it becomes even harder when starting all over. So keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about API documentation. So when it comes to API documentation, the very, very, very first thing you want to do is read the introduction and the overview of the API to find out what exactly it's about. And a lot of times these APIs have a quick start guide. I always love to go to the quick start guide so I can easily understand, okay, what is this going to be doing? Can I make like one request to see it successfully? Before I end up reading the whole documentation, I end up wasting a bunch of time. I like to get started with a quick start and find out exactly what's going to be happening and see if I can make one request. We're good to go with the rest. Then you want to study the endpoints and the methods. What are the endpoints? What's the structure? What can you do with the API? What can we post? What is the request body that we're going to be posting? What are the and that goes into the next one: examine requests and response formats. Studying the methods, studying the endpoints, which leads you to examine the requests and the response formats. How are the requests being made to certain endpoints? Are they form requests? Are they JSON requests? And within the same API, you can have some that are making form requests. You can have some that are making JSON requests. So and then the response formats as well. Some responses might come back in a JSON format. Some responses might just come back in text. So all those things, you need to know what you're going to be requesting and what you're going to be expecting in return, and then you move accordingly. And then also you're going to have to identify what parameters and options might be passed, because in some requests that you're making, you're going to be passing parameters to, maybe to say, okay, I want to limit the results that are being returned to this get response to 20 results, or you can make it to 100 results. Different things that you can do to like make the API work better. And those are all the things that are going into consideration. And the reason that I think it's very important for you to have this mindset already is, if you're on a team that is building an API, you want to also be able to contribute to the conversation with the developers to say, hey, we should consider doing this, to do this in a way that makes the API a lot more efficient. So you can definitely contribute to the process as well. And then definitely very important, understanding the authentication mechanisms. Are we just using a basic auth? Are we using a token? Are we using OAuth? Are we, so many different options that we touched a little bit on it in our live stream, I believe, where we're talking about the different type of authentications, when you can use HTTP bin to try out the different type of authentications. So, and you can also make those recommendations and suggestions as well. Now, continue with API documentation. you want to also explore the error handling and status codes. Very, very important to see what errors, like what the errors that are returned based on the negative test cases that you run and the status codes, because I think knowing what the status codes mean gives you a better insight and overview on what you on the recommendations that you can make, and see, like, are we using the right? I always ask myself these questions: are we using the right status codes in this situation? And then you can make suggestions to the developer, to the product owner, etc., and move from there. So also you want to review the rate limit and the quotas. That should be in the documentation. How many requests can you send out at a particular time, and what will throttle a user, things like that. Then you want to look for sample requests and responses. So that's what you're going to be using to see if the API is working correctly, by making these sample requests, and things like that. And then experiment with interactive tools. There are different tools that you can use to make requests to the API so you can get a good idea and understanding. And lastly, most importantly, if you do not understand something, you definitely need to seek clarification. Whether it's contacting the developers of the API, if your team is developing the API, contact your developers, get clarification. Do never, never, never assume that something should work a particular way, because if you assume wrong, it can be totally, totally catastrophic. All right, and I don't want to see that for you. Now, let's get into endpoints and methods. So, of course, to get a better understanding of the endpoints and the methods, like we already said, we just went through it, we have to review the API documentation. In addition, we need to explore the API reference or specifications, where it gives you like all the details about what the fields are that are being passed in the request for, and the methods, things like that. Very, very important to know what type of data, that's going to be based on the schema for the API. What type of data you can send? Is it an integer? Is it a float where you can have decimals? Is it just a string? Is it a Boolean when this could be a true or false? You have to understand that, and then also understanding what type of response you're going to get. Use the interactive documentation tools such as Swagger. That's a really good one, where and we'll touch on Swagger a little bit later, but it gives you a good visual of what is the structure of the API, understanding the service providers, and then analyze the API request in applications. So so what that would mean is, if a website is making an API request, you can use a tool like in Google Chrome. They have the Chrome developer tools, where you can check on the network tab, which you've seen me done plenty of times, and we see what are the requests that are being made to the API and what's the response as well. And we'll definitely touch on that again in a future live stream, but it's very, very important for you to know about that. And in addition, for the endpoints and the methods, consult the community resources and forums. Usually, like, major APIs are going to have some type of documentation and people helping each other. Experiment with the API. I can't stress that enough, especially if you can have access to a test or staging environment, playing around with the API, sending different requests, see what happens. And that's definitely possible if you are part of the team building the API. You can have a sandbox environment where you can send all types of different requests, start building your test. Check for versioning and deprecation notices, because a lot of times there are changes that made to the API, and we might still be using an old version, and we're losing out on features. Or they can start to deprecate the API, saying, okay, this version is no longer going to be available, and we don't see that. We don't upgrade, and then we miss out. And then now our application isn't working because we didn't do our due diligence, checking the notices to make sure that we are upgrading appropriately. Now, let's talk about generating test data. So there's many different ways you can generate test data. There's manual creation. That means you figure out the test data yourself. There's you can get sample data from the API docs, like we just mentioned. There's tools for random data generation, which we'll touch on that like in a live stream, where we'll work on generating data with different tools. There's boundary testing. We've talked about it before in the past, but pretty much saying if something can only accept between 10 and 50, that means you would check between 10 and 50, but you'd also check 9, you check 51 to make sure that you are getting the proper error messages. There's data generation scripts. There's record and replay, where you can record your steps and then it's going to record that data and you can use it again. There's database seeding. There's mocking and stubbing. Perturbation. Not even familiar with that one myself, but we'll look into it some more. There's data from production environment, and then there's test data management tools. So many different options of generating test data. So we just have to continue to to see what's the best solution for our needs. Now, what are some techniques for testing APIs? So we're not going to get into every one of these, but because these techniques are standard for QA. And you can do the same things for APIs. But so there's functional testing, making sure that it works, integration testing, making sure it works with other systems, security testing, making sure our API is secure, performance testing, load testing, stress testing, making sure that it can handle a particular amount of load. And if you push it to the limit, what's going to happen? Boundary testing, like we mentioned, error handling testing. So if we send invalid data that our APIs are responding correctly, are we getting a 500 response when we should be getting a 400 response? Things like that we have to consider. Compatibility testing. Usually APIs should be compatible because they're just APIs. They're not UI based, but you should still check it to see if I send a request from here, is it possible that if we send it from a particular user agent, it could be rejected or it can get an error. So that's another reason that you'd want to be compatibility testing, because it should be pretty much working across whatever you send the request from. And then lastly, there's regression testing, probably like one of the most important, because when you make a change to the code, to the application, you don't want to break other stuff. So you need regression testing and a fast and easy way to run your test so that everything that came before, you can get a quick, immediate feedback that it's still working and that you can move forward with the changes that you're doing. So you can be focusing on all the prior testing that we mentioned and not have to worry about if anything that was working before doesn't work now. All right, so let's get into some API testing tools, and we'll go through these one by one because these are the tools that you'll have to decide which one you're going to use, and you'll be using pretty much on an everyday basis. So quickly, let's go through. We have Postman, we have CURL, usually called curl, Swagger, Open API tools, and then we have SoapUI, Insomnia, JMeter, Newman, Rest Assured, Karate, and WireMock. And you've seen me use Postman already. You've seen me use Insomnia. We had streams when it came to load testing and performance testing with JMeter. And I don't think I've ever used Rest Assured on this, but the Rest Assured, the Karate, those are more for automation. And there's plenty of other tools that are available for API testing, but these are pretty much some of the most popular ones. So let's talk about Postman. Postman is a widely used API testing tool that offers a user-friendly interface for designing, testing, and managing APIs. It allows you to create and execute HTTP requests, organize requests into collections or into folders, and automate testing with scripts. Postman supports various authentication methods, environments, and integration with CI/CD pipelines. And this is an example of Postman, of how it looks. And you saw this pretty much before when we used Postman. Like I've used it many times, but this is an example of how Postman would look. And we have the collection, we have the request, we have the method, we have the parameters that are being passed, we have our request body and our response, and there's even you can set up the documentation for it as well. Then we have CURL. So CURL is a command line tool for transferring data with URL syntax, making it useful for testing APIs from the command line or scripting environments. It supports a wide range of protocols, including HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, and more, and can send custom requests with headers, parameters, and payloads. And I would say, because CURL is a command line tool, it's probably a little bit more difficult and complicated to use that one, because if you make one mistake in the command line tool, then you're going to get errors and you have to get it right. Let's go to so this is like an idea of how CURL would look, right? So you do CURL, we're going to localhost port 8080, and then the endpoint is /API/students. And then when you make that request, you're getting a list of the response. Like you're getting a list of the students. So you have ID 1, name the person's name, ID 2, name the person's name, and that's pretty much. And you can do like for post, you can do for get, all those things. And we'll even try it on a live stream as well. All right, so next we have Swagger as an API testing tool. Swagger provides tools for designing, documenting, and testing APIs using the Open API specification, formerly known as Swagger. Swagger UI allows you to visualize and interact with APIs based on Open API definitions, making it easy to explore endpoints, parameters, and responses. Swagger Codegen can generate client libraries and server stubs from open API specifications, facilitating API testing and development. And maybe for the API that I'm building, I should generate Swagger documentation to make the documentation easy to understand, and we can continue to, every time we add a new endpoint, we should also have the documentation be generated, and that's going to help my tech barbarians who are doing the QA testing to have a good interaction with the API and the testing. So I'm going to add that to our backlog actually to implement that. But yeah, so Swagger is very, very popular. Here is a screenshot of how Swagger looks, where it has the endpoints, the get, the post, the get, delete, patch, delete, and all the different things that you can do with it. This I would say this is very, very important to start learning. All right, SoapUI. SoapUI is a comprehensive API testing tool specifically designed for testing SOAP and REST APIs. It offers a graphical interface for creating and executing test cases, assertions, and data-driven tests. SoapUI supports various authentication methods, mocking, and load testing capabilities. I used SoapUI maybe 10 years ago, and I've never used it again. It's needed for testing SOAP APIs, but I just for me, I haven't seen many companies and many applications being built with SoapUI. So with SOAP, so I really can't say much about it. And this is how the interface of SoapUI looks. To me, it looks very old and outdated. So I'm not even going to spend the time to go through SoapUI. It does use the SOAP, which uses XML. But if you were to land yourself in a spot using SOAP, I would definitely recommend you take a SoapUI course where it can help you ramp up to it. All right, Insomnia. So we also looked at Insomnia the other day. Insomnia is a lightweight API testing tool with a modern and intuitive interface. It allows you to create and organize API requests, manage environments and variables, and automate testing with scripts. Insomnia supports features like request chaining, code generation, and plugins for additional functionality. So to me, Insomnia is very similar to Postman, and I used to like it a lot because although it could do a lot of the things that Postman could, it was very lightweight. But now I feel that it's becoming very pretty much not identical, but very close to Postman. And it's becoming a bit heavy as well from what I've seen, but I could be wrong. But I still like it. But for me, it's almost not an alternative from what I'm seeing to Postman. So I don't know. I could be wrong about that. But let's keep going. So this is a screenshot of how Insomnia looks. And you still have when you look at it, it's very similar to Postman. You can still have your collections. You can have your variables. You have your endpoint field. You have your methods that you can put in, the JSON, all that stuff. Now let's jump into JMeter. Apache JMeter is a powerful open source tool for performance and load testing, but it can also be used for API testing. So I'll say this right now. I probably wouldn't be using JMeter for API testing unless I had to do the performance and load testing on the API. Because there's other tools that you can do it, to me, more efficiently. So JMeter supports HTTP, HTTPS, SOAP, REST, FTP, JDBC, and other protocols, making it versatile for testing various types of APIs. JMeter allows you to create test plans, simulate concurrent users, and measure performance metrics. And that's the good part about JMeter. But number one, it's a desktop tool, and I don't know. For me, I think there's better ways to do the API testing than going through JMeter. But again, I am not a heavy JMeter person. So if you have a case of why you should do API testing through JMeter instead of any other tool, I would be more than happy to hear it. So definitely just leave me a comment about that. Let's go back real quick. Okay, and this is a screenshot of JMeter. Like I said, we went through JMeter on a live stream before, and this is pretty much how it looks. And you have to set it up, and then you can also have it do how many requests you want at a particular time. Very, very useful tool. All right, next, let's get into Newman. Newman is a command line tool for running Postman collections and tests in continuous integration environments. It allows you to execute Postman collections from the command line, making it easy to integrate API testing into CI/CD pipelines and automated workflows. So pretty much, Newman allows you to automate the test that you write in Postman. So you can run the test manually in Postman, but then if you want to have it run on a schedule or run through through a continuous integration, continuous deployment environment, then you'd want to use Newman to kick it off. And there you go. There goes Newman over there. Newman. And here is a screenshot from how Newman looks and how it would run. So you say Newman run, and then the Postman collection, which is a JSON file, and then it's going to go through all of the endpoints and giving you the pass or fail and a report at the end. Rest assured. So Rest assured is one of my favorite API testing tools when it comes to automating. That was the first one I got involved with, like when I was working with Java and automating APIs for a company that I had recently joined. Like when I joined the company, I was using Rest Assured, and that's how I learned about Rest Assured, and that's how I learned about API testing. So Rest Assured is a Java library for testing RESTful APIs, providing a domain-specific language, a DSL, for writing tests. It integrates seamlessly with popular Java testing frameworks like JUnit and TestNG, and support features like authentication, JSON, XML parsing, and validation. Like I said, I love Rest Assured. It is a great tool, and I learned so much. I built so many things, and I even integrated Rest Assured into some automation frameworks that I built. And this is an example of how Rest Assured code would look inside of a Java class. So you have real quick, you have before class. So and we've done this before when we did some Selenium automation with Java, but before class. So this is how you're pretty much setting up the Rest Assured automation, and then inside of the test, you're saying this is the base URL, and then you make a request to that URL, and this is the results that we should get. And you can do so many different tests with that methodology. So there's also Karate, which I used a little bit almost 8 years ago. So Karate is an open source framework for testing web services, including REST, SOAP, and GraphQL APIs, using a BDD, a behavior-driven development syntax. And I do want to get into BDD on this channel and how you can use it for testing. So Karate allows you to write tests in a feature file format that is human readable and expressive, with built-in support for assertions, data-driven testing, and parallel execution. Parallel execution, super, super important. And this is an example of how a Karate file would look. So the scenario is create and retrieve a cat, given the URL, and that's the endpoint, and the request name is Billy. When you use the method post, so you're posting Billy to that URL, then you should get a status code of 201. 201, I believe 201 is accepted. And then you should match the response of, you get an ID, which is not null, and the name in that ID in that response, or the name of that response should be Billy. And then you can continue with, given the path of the response ID, so the ID for when you submitted Billy, you should make a request to that, and then you should get the status code of 200. So pretty cool. Maybe we'll dive into Karate at some point. It is a cool way to automate API testing. So that we'll keep on the docket as well. Then there's WireMock. WireMock is a flexible library for stubbing and mocking HTTP responses in Java applications, making it useful for testing APIs in isolation. It allows you to define stubs with common responses, behaviors, and request matching criteria, enabling thorough testing of API interactions. So pretty much you don't need to have a full working API in order to be able to do the test. You can put some examples, and you can say, all right, this is our expectation, especially when it comes to mocking external APIs, things like that, in order to make sure that your API, that the development that you're doing with the API should be successful. And this is an example of how the WireMock tool would look. All right, so that is it. That is it for today. In conclusion, we had a recap about what we did last week, about pretty much what the heck an API is. We talked about the benefits of testing APIs, how we can prepare ourselves for testing APIs, and then we talked about some techniques for testing. The techniques are very similar to the standard quality assurance practices that we do, but we have to apply them to API testing. And then we just finished going through some tools for API testing. And lastly, if you have any questions, if you have any feedback, I would be more than happy to hear it and interact with you. Definitely leave me a comment and join me on the live stream tomorrow night, where we are going to be going through APIs and live implementation, how we can start testing APIs, what tools we can use. Are there any sample APIs that we can spin up locally to get more testing experience? So I am definitely looking forward to it. Hopefully that so if you have any questions, feedback, leave it in the comments. Join the live stream. All right. And let's wrap it up. So that is our presentation on how we can get into and start testing APIs. A lot of content, a lot of information, but watch it over and over and over, because you want to make sure that this is going to be like, nowadays, this is the main thing that you're doing in companies as a QA engineer. You are testing APIs, because that is the foundation. That is the business logic of your company. You want to make sure that you have a good understanding, a good example about that. And because they're going to ask you in interviews about testing APIs. And you want to make sure that you're able to answer, that you're confident, and then you can see how the actual API is going to start integrating with your front-end application. And we can even go through that on a live stream as well. So think about that, and let's go from there. And like I said, join me on the live stream tomorrow as we get into testing APIs. But with that being said, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully you found this very information useful and informative, entertaining. And you let me know if you think I missed something, or if you want me to go deeper onto something else. Leave me a comment, join me on the live stream, talk to me in the live chat, and let me know what else it is that I can help you with better understanding how to test APIs. The next week, we're going to get into how can we start automating APIs, and we'll go from there. We'll figure out where we're going to move from there. All right. With that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. Before you leave, do me a huge favor. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you can know every single time that we go live. And if you need additional help with APIs, do not hesitate to go over to www.techcoachralph.dev, where you can sign up for one-on-one coaching, as well as get access to exclusive content that is going to help you level up your career, especially if you are a QA engineer. And we can go ahead and we can win together. All right. With that being said, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much again. This is Tech Coach Ralph with another episode of Software Explorations, talking about API testing, and we are out.
If you enjoyed the fascinating information shared in this video and you want more, be sure to hit the subscribe button to Tech Coach Ralph to be notified for new videos.